So hi everyone, I'm here today with Kathy Abusow, who is President and CEO of the Sustainable Forestry Initiative. And we are of course here for the SRS Expert Series. So welcome Kathy.
Thank you for having me.
So I'm going to dive in at the deep end with my first question. So 2020 saw several deforestation commitments come up short. What do you think the main challenges have been?
Well, first of all, I think it was an ambitious goal to get to zero deforestation to 2020. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with ambitious goals. So I think that's absolutely fine, provided we learn from them. And so I think if we've learned what our struggles were or learned how we can do better next time, I think we're, in a good position. I think some of the learnings could likely be around working with your suppliers and supply chains directly. Now, obviously, a lot of these retailers are going to say, what do you think we've been doing? But I do think being partners with your suppliers, understanding what their challenges are and digging in is super important. I think listening as well to civil society, which is also consumers' expectations, is very important. I think some brands have a tendency to listen to one ENGO to solve their problems. And I think it's much more important to, as I said, understand your supply chain, understand civil society's expectations, and obviously understand the science and what you're trying to solve for. And so I think that another challenge, I'll be honest with you, is the very fact that it was all encompassing. So deforestation is about so many different product lines in the supply chain that it goes back to being an ambitious task. And some of those supply chains have more experience with how to address these issues, have more transparency with how to address these issues. And for example, with forest certification, these standards have been around 25 years. And trust me when I say we are nowhere today what we were 25 years ago. We have learned so much about supply chains and about transparency and about the science and the conservation impact of our efforts and how to conduct audits, et cetera. So, but other supply chains haven't had that necessary knowledge. So you're just starting at a different spot and needing to move forward. So I think not giving up hope. And I love the shift, frankly, to forest positive. Because when the first Consumer Goods Forum 2020 deforestation goals came out, I was somewhat concerned, while deforestation is a huge issue, I was somewhat concerned that deforestation was the sole focus and we weren't looking, and that's on one end of the spectrum. But for example, in our supply chain, sustainable forest management is on the other side of the spectrum, where you can solve for carbon, solve for climate, solve for species recovery, solve for water quality and quantity. And I love the forest positive perspective because it's showing that depending on how you engage and how you manage forests, you can either be part of the problem or part of the solution. And I think that awareness is fantastic. And it's more solutions oriented as well, which is what we strive to be.
Okay, thank you. So you mentioned certification there, and obviously it's a topic you know very well. But certification's role as a tool to end deforestation has been widely discussed in relation to such commitments.
Yeah.
How do you summarize the role of forest certification programs?
Well, let me take on the first part about the role of deforestation and then summarizing the role of certification. Well, I'll actually start with the latter. So the role of certification is to ensure sustainable forest management, which, so deforestation is the lowest bar. Like those are the things to avoid. So forest certification is a tool that is much more advanced than avoiding deforestation. Every single forest certification standard, whether it's SFI or PFC that endorses us or FSC, all have requirements to address the risk in their supply chain, and that's avoiding deforestation. But our expectations are much higher and the bar is much higher, and you can do a lot more good through sustainable forest management, as I just mentioned, and I can get more in depth on. But the role of certification, specifically in deforestation, is but one tool. For example, we say avoid it, right? And we say do a risk assessment to know your source of supply. And when the Lacey Act came out and EUTR came out, SFI sort of led the way in collaboration with the World Resources Institute to do risk assessment tools to know your supply chain in different countries around the world. But it's not a single organizational issue or a single tool issue, deforestation. It involves governments to have infrastructure involved. It requires, again, civil society. It requires corporations. These issues, these important issues to solve for climate change, to solve for sustainable communities, need to involve everyone. And I think that's really important. And I think this speaks to the evolution as well with the forest positive. Certainly it speaks to the evolution of SFI. We created a new strategic direction. And ours is focused on advancing sustainability through forest-focused collaboration. And so we're saying, hey, we can't do this alone. We need to do this together, but together we can advance these issues. And certification plays an important role in advancing and addressing sustainability challenges, and certification itself needs to evolve. And so we're evolving in terms of technology and the use of technology. We're evolving in terms of we're in a standard revision right now and creating climate smart forestry performance measures. We're evolving in terms of wanting to engage in radical transparency with suppliers and retailers that are interested in looking at pilots to look at that transparency in the supply chain, to go beyond the check mark of certification and that independent audit, and to really explore that supply chain and understand the good that's in that supply chain, as well as the challenges that are there that we can drill in on and improve.
Okay, great, thank you. So one of the other things you mentioned there around communities, and I guess connected to that, the workers who stem from those local communities. Um, do you think certification can do more to protect the rights of the people working in commodity supply chains?
Uh, well, yes, you're going to see a repeating theme here. I think certification can do more. I think governments can do more. I think corporations can do more, and civil society can do more. And we all have to be doing more together and collaborating. So again, in our certification standard, and with PUC and other standards as well, you're going to see a requirement to comply with social laws, such as those covering civil rights, equal employment opportunities, anti-discrimination, anti-harassment, workers' comp, Indigenous peoples' rights, and communities' rights to know prevailing wages, occupational health and safety, as well as following the intent of the ILO. And so these requirements, again, are embedded in the standard. And these requirements are also addressed through risk assessment. So trying to understand your supply chain. This is why it's important, where I started to say retailers and manufacturers have to work closely with their supply chain, because you have to pinpoint where are the risks in your supply chain as it relates to these issues. And certainly a good auditor is going to know where those risks are as well to pinpoint it. But a good auditor is going to look at your own evaluation to identify those risks and whether you've done a good job at addressing them. But sometimes there are other things that need to be addressed beyond compliance. And so I'll take the issue of Indigenous peoples' rights and recognition. We're working again in that spirit of collaboration and relationship building with over 120 Indigenous peoples and Indigenous peoples communities, and we're working with them in a wide variety of ways, understanding their traditional knowledge, their ecological knowledge, also providing them access to the supply chain, also creating a standard that's specifically relevant to Indigenous communities, and how they manage for their forests and respecting their ways of knowing. And so I think that, again, as SFI, we've evolved to look at relationship building between our certified organizations and Indigenous communities, but we've also evolved in terms of developing standards and requirements that are more meaningful for Indigenous communities. And we feel that the future of our forests are going to be incredibly stronger when we have positive, again, back to forest positive, and why I like it, these positive relationships between community groups as well as Indigenous peoples who, have those important ties to the land.
Okay, very good. Thank you. So again, I mean, we talked about communities there, obviously conservation and education, also two things that SFI is very involved in. But how has SFI moved to mitigate the impacts of COVID-19 on your work and also the safety of your workers?
Right. Well, first of all, I'll say that uh, pretty much around the globe, the forest sector has been seen as an essential service as it relates to COVID-19, whether it was consumers that got focused on toilet paper, but more importantly, the medical profession depending on paper-based masks, gowns, and other PPE. I think there is, I think also with packaging, where we care more again about food safety. People are staying in, more food is being ordered home, more products are being ordered into the home than ever before. And I think that's a really important role for certification again, to demonstrate that sustainable forest management is part of the solution, is even part of the solution to addressing these crises issues. But we have to ensure that the forest is managed and maintained sustainably, and that's where certification comes in. So I hope that anyone involved in the supply chain really is paying attention to the role of certification. As an organization ourselves at SFI, where all of our employees are still working from home, but have been effective at doing so and staying safe. So I'm pleased about that. Obviously, events and all those sorts of things have been canceled. In terms of our integration with supply chain, we've had to learn through COVID, and I think it'll be interesting. A lot of people talk about bouncing back. I think we're going to bounce forward after COVID as a result of some of our learning. So we've had to depend more on technology, even for audits, and that's really interesting. And we're getting a lot of positive feedback, whether it's on efficiency or cost effectiveness, but also on transparency and credibility. With an audit, you can only obviously focus on sample sites. With technology, you can have more access and more information based on a broader scale. And so we've actually struck a subgroup on technology, SFI has, and we're also collaborating with PFC on the subgroup to focus on how can we look at the certification audits differently moving forward, and what have we learned from COVID-19 in doing so.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, I mean, you kind of mentioned that concept of building back better, which is obviously something that a lot of organizations are looking at the moment. So if I can change the pace a little bit,
Yeah.
we are here for the Sustainable Retail Summit, of course. SFI has been a long-term sponsor of the SRS. So what keeps bringing you back to this event?
Well, first of all, we are interested in the ambitious goals of the SRS and the members. We, as I said, part of our mission is to advance sustainability through forest-focused collaborations. We understand that we need everyone in the supply chain, from smallholders through to large consumer-facing retailers, to address these sustainability issues. And the SRS represents an important component of that supply chain, and it tends to be populated with people that care about sustainability. So it's a natural audience for us as well. We are interested in attending to listen to what are the struggles, to understand how certification can be a partner in addressing those goals, how we can set up supplier arrangements as well. to facilitate whether it's information transfer or actually true collaboration on the ground. And we've got our conservation impact work that we would love retailer support on. It's helping us look behind certification and address and understand how many species have been maintained or recovered on our forest footprint. How much of water quality and quantity has been maintained because of our certified forest footprint? How are we addressing climate change, and what are these climate smart forestry practices that occur? And then understand what has gone right, where's the room for improvement, what are the best management practices, so that we can set up structures. So the standards are a starting ground, but we can set up structures to recover species and work with landowners across the entire supply chain to provide the habitat that's needed for specific species. So it's very, very rewarding just to understand what SRS representatives are interested in, and then set up our tools and programs to complement them. And so now we're looking at ESG as well, and what is the role of certification in delivering on ESG priorities, and circular economy is one that we're looking at as well. So it's good to hear from them to ensure that we're setting up relevant programs.
Okay, thank you. So it sounds like you guys get a lot out of SRS, but given the theme of this year's event, which is Purpose and the Shared Road to Recovery, what would you like the key takeaway to be for delegates who are joining us?
Well, our mission is to advance sustainability through forest-focused collaboration. And so I do think the takeaway is collaboration and partnership. Understanding your suppliers, understanding your supply chain, working with infrastructures that do exist, such as certification, and understanding where the constraints are there and where you need to go deeper in your specific supply chain as well.
Okay, well, Kathy, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I'm sure the folks listening will have taken a lot of things away from what you just said and plenty to think about. So thank you for joining us, and maybe I'll see you at the SRS.
Thanks, Lee. Looking forward to being back in person again. All right,
Thank
take
you.
care.